Just waiting for Reverend Aaron Long to arrive. Talking about the solas of the Reformation, which was a counterblast to the corruptions of the late medieval church and brought correction, consolation, strength, and comfort to the church that was in the business of selling anxiety and indulgences. Hello there, Aaron.
Hey, Donald, sorry, I just got out of the shower. As soon as I got out of the shower, I got a call from Davison Funeral Home. Had somebody die that I didn't even quite know who it was, but they wanted to be buried in the graveyard and wanted me to do a graveside service. So I've been having to sort that out while going to the chiropractor.
Okay, are you okay for today?
Oh, we're good. I'm good until 11.
Until 11. And by the
Yes,
way,
sir.
my Zoom has the last two times cut out on Graham Ray yesterday and then Arthur K this morning at the 45 minute point. So I don't know what's going on. I checked my subscription and my 1 year. I go out until next March of 2026, where I can do 3, 4, up to 30 hours in any given session. So I don't know.
There's something weird that came up this week. I wanted to sort of talk to you about to get your take on. And this is honestly something that I don't know how it relates, but it's how things play out. And you have a unique perspective as a military chaplain on this. We've been talking about unwritten protocols, and it'll make sense as I get into it. And it's something that I have in 22 years seen across denominations, but nobody ever puts them to paper. And it started with two separate instances I've had to deal with. One, the first one, and the one I wanted to go to first, is the idea that once a pastor, and I say pastor very specifically here, because I've seen it in Baptist, I've seen it in Methodist, I've seen it with the Anglicans, with the in our tradition, all of it. Once a pastor is called by a congregation and installed, that senior pastor, nothing goes on with other clergy in their church building or on their grounds without that pastor's permission.
Okay.
I have run into some cases, especially with the Anglicans, to where they've got this weird idea that clergy can just go in and do what they want to in a pastor's church without at least asking permission or respecting that pastor's call. And I even talked to Peter about it, and Peter agreed with me because he grew up with this too, that even in the Anglican tradition in England, the bishop would not just walk into a parish and tell the seated pastor or whatever you want to, whatever title they're using, what to do in their congregation. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Well, the only thing I know is that the bishop is known to be coming. He has his schedule in advance, so the rector or minister would know of his coming. And of course, in the Episcopal context, you're not doing anything outside the prayer book or the hymnal. So I'm not familiar with what you're talking about.
I had a guy come in and just start using the sanctuary, and he didn't ask me permission to do it.
Eric Paul's Chapel?
Yeah. It wasn't in the context of worship, but it has just sort of shocked me, and I bit my tongue to a degree because I don't want to blow hot, because I don't think the guy knows what etiquette is, if that makes sense.
Makes no sense. What was he doing?
He was taking pictures.
Okay. Weird.
Well, it's like, is there something that we all just grew up with? Even in the Presbyterians I've been around understand this, that have grown up in the church. I think we've got a problem of these people coming out of these evangelical churches that just don't understand protocol. I guess in a military sense, you'd call it protocol. It's not a hierarchy thing. Like
Well,
it's
you know, we had a very strict protocol for going onto a ship. You,
right.
you walked up the gangplank, you turned to the rear and saluted the flag. You walked up on at to the top of the gangplank and had two people there, an officer and an enlisted guy, both of them with firearms on their side,
Mhm.
and you requested to come aboard.
Right.
And they said, granted. And then you saluted each other and off you went, to your business on the ship. So it was very strictly controlled. And I'm very familiar with that because I've done it hundreds of times. Even though they know you and know you're a shipmate, you don't get on that ship without that protocol, period. End of story.
And it's
And
just odd to me because I've come across it and it's always the same type of people that either were unchurched or were very weakly churched. I've never had a Baptist pastor come into my church and tell me what we're going to do. Do you understand what I'm saying?
yeah,
It,
just like
or
I wouldn't go in his church and tell him what to do. That's
I
his church.
even because, and it's funny, I had a funeral I had to do about 9, 10 years ago that one of the most militant lesbian pastors in the UCC was asked to participate.
Oh no, I don't think I could
Well,
do it.
it's a funeral. So she even came to me, and I know she hated my guts, and I know she had to suck it up to do it. But she even came to me and asked permission when the family asked her to participate.
Oh,
And it's like I was thinking about that. This woman I know couldn't stand to look at me. And even she had the decency to come to me and say, the family has asked me to participate. Can I participate?
yeah,
And then I was thinking about this with another funeral I did the other week with that lesbian. That lesbian, she made small talk, and you could tell we were all uncomfortable, but we did not, because it was a funeral,
yeah,
we did not get into any sort of in depth fight or anything at it because we both knew why
sure,
we were there.
sure, sure.
I was doing a funeral about a month ago at a Methodist church, and it was out in Iredell County. So it's about 90 minutes from here, out near Troutman. And it was on a Sunday afternoon. So I just left church and drove out there, got there about a half hour before the family. And I was sitting at the church, and the church's pastor, who is one of those liberal Methodists, starts on me about women's ordination and this and all the other. And I finally just looked at him and said, that is not appropriate conversation for why we are here. If you want to debate with me, if you want to fight with me, we will set up a time and we will do it. But we are here for a funeral. These people don't seem to understand protocol. It's just bizarre. You do a funeral, you're there for the funeral because the funeral is not for the dead person, the funeral's for the family.
Yeah, yeah. Well, we had to live by that recognition of our differences in the military because,
Right.
like on an aircraft carrier, there were three of you, or on a base, there might be five or six of you.
Mhm.
So you'd preach different things, you know, depending on your theology, and you had to let that go. I had one command chaplain, two of them, in fact, who were absolute reprobates. Both of them tried to repress me as a chaplain. Didn't work, but they tried. And it was totally inappropriate. I didn't try to repress their ignorance and their heresy, indifference, incompetence, shallowness, poor training. Didn't bother with it. I mean, you want to be that way, that's what you are. That's what your denomination sent you as. But don't come my way and start trying to teach me your hostile ignorance.
But where does this come from? It used to be people just understood this stuff.
Well, yeah, if you go to your church, I get what you give. You're a Heidelberger.
Right.
You go to a
If I
Presbyterian.
were to go to a Presbyterian church, I would understand I'm walking in with a Westminster church.
Yeah,
I'm going to
exactly.
respect that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But where did this come from?
Oh, I don't know. I'm not as familiar with it as you are. You've mentioned a couple of incidences, but I don't know how wide that really is.
Well, it's like I think I told you the story about Barry Surratt at Pilgrim Reformed. They hired him, and he said he would use the creeds, he would teach the Heidelberg, and he would baptize babies. He was an independent Baptist. They were averaging about 300 a Sunday when he got hired. His third Sunday there, he stood in the pulpit and he told everybody in the congregation, the thousand or so people buried in the graveyard were burning in hell because they were not baptized by immersion.
Oh, that's completely, totally
And I like
unacceptable.
Not Lyerly Reformed, St. Luke's Reformed down in Rowan County. They hired a guy from the Assemblies of God who agreed to teach the Heidelberg and all of this. This is the problem with the EA. But anyway, he's got them speaking in tongues and all this. It's like even the people that get hired do not respect
Gotcha.
the churches that I don't get where this is coming from. If you go to a church, you need to respect what that church is.
Would
If it
tell
is not
those
completely
EA,
apostate,
I tell those EA churches that they have erred and strayed, and that they could have a lay-led service, and a layman could read Ursinus in the commentary, and that would suffice for 20 to 30 minutes of instruction.
right,
EA Church should have Heidelberg catechisms in the pew or available to the people so that the layman can read. It's not the layman preaching, it's Ursinus preaching, which, by the way, is pretty solid stuff. And by the way, I just moments ago before I got on here, posted in Twist House the republication of Ursinus's commentary by the.
I didn't mean to make that nasty shot the way I did, but I don't see why anybody has the audacity or the arrogance to try to write a commentary on the Heidelberg Catechism. The man that wrote the Catechism wrote the best commentary on it.
Yeah, it looks to me like Huxema, they are his sermons. He was a pastor. He was a full-time pastor in a Dutch Reformed church at the biggest in Grand Rapids, about 1,000 people. So he's preaching every Sunday night on the Heidelberger, but
Mhm.
he's also a full-time professor over in the seminary. It looks like some shallow sermon stuff. It's very, very basic. It's on a completely lower level than his work on the Synod of Dort, which is a classic. So
Right.
he can do the homework. It's just that the commentary in the Heidelberg isn't, it's not up to snuff.
Well, I'm going to tell you, Donald, if you really want to know what I think the best Heidelberg commentary is that is not Ursinus's, William Ames, and if I can dig it out, I got it in my office over at the house. William Ames collected his sermons on the Heidelberg that he preached whenever he was in the Netherlands. And it's funny, it doesn't say Heidelberg on it. I came across it accidentally. I can't remember what the name of it is, But it's a book of 52 sermons that when you read them, it follows the Heidelberg day by day. And it is probably the second best commentary on the Heidelberg Catechism, even though it doesn't put the questions and answers in and doesn't identify as it.
I thought William Ames was English, but he was not.
No, William Ames was English. After Perkins died, Ames fled England and went to the Netherlands. Ames was involved in the Synod of Dort.
Oh,
He
from
was like a
England.
secretary or something like that.
Okay.
William Ames, the one that wrote Marrow of Theology. Ames died in the Netherlands. And honestly, out of all the Puritans, I'm always going to be a Perkins man. But out of all the but I don't really consider Perkins to be a Puritan. I believe Perkins was just an Elizabethan churchman.
Yeah, I agree.
But of all the Puritans,
A conforming churchman and a Calvinist.
right? Because I hate the fact they list Perkins as a Puritan because it's actually not paying attention to the Elizabethan church. Perkins was an Anglican.
Yeah.
William Ames was a Puritan, and him and Thomas Watson are tied for my two favorites. But I mean, it's like I've said about Watson. If I'm going to go with a commentary on the Westminster Shorter, I'm
Absolutely.
going to go with Watson's Body of Divinity because whether Watson was there or not, he was involved. He knows the text, what the text is supposed to mean.
Yeah.
He's not interpolating something later on.
Yeah.
And
I'm
I don't know
thinking,
why everybody wants to go with these new writers and this other crap. These men were there when it was written. They know what it says.
yeah,
They knew what the arguments were. They knew everything.
yeah. Well, exactly. Exactly.
The other protocol question I have ended up running into this week, and I've kept my mouth shut about the name of the person, and I'm not going to go into it about the individual, is the idea of self promotion. It's almost demonic. I see this a lot, especially among the millennial clergy, to where they elevate themselves whenever they're doing something over the church and what they're doing. I was raised, and you do this actually almost instinctively on all of your posts. It isn't look at what Donald Veach is doing.
No, no,
It's
no. It's
this
just the
is
opposite. It's like
right. That's what I'm saying.
I'm doing Hodge on the Westminster. It's not about me, it's Hodge.
Hodge,
I'm
right.
doing Twiss on Dort. I'm doing Ursinus on Heidelberger. I'm doing other things. Yeah,
I didn't know Twist wrote on Dort.
he did. He actually did. And in 1620,
So I
before,
may look that up.
well, I can send you the PDF and Word document if you want.
Yes.
Yes, he wrote it in 1620 after Dort, and it's very readable and accessible. Um, it's nowhere near where Hoeksema is on Dort, but it's good to get his viewpoint. And of course, he was a prolocutor at Westminster, a Church of England man who died a year after it got going, so he never saw it through. But um, yeah, he wrote on it. I can send that to you.
Oh,
But
I've
anyways,
also wanted to tell you I've had some Presbyterians and Anglicans argue with me that the Scots and the English never use the Heidelberg. And I had to point out to them that what did the Presbyterians are the ones that were the most militant about it. And I was like, what do you think the Scottish Church used before Westminster? The Scottish Church used the Scots Confession, the Second Helvetic, and the Heidelberg Catechism. They used
then
John
there's
Knox's form of prayers for worship. There was a whole model of Presbyterianism that existed before Westminster that formed the basis of what Westminster would become.
yeah, yeah. I can't see Presbyterians today guffawing at the Heidelberger. I don't know of any Presbyterians who do that. Just the reverse.
Well,
It's
these
not,
are,
it's not put in alongside the Westminster Confess standards as it should be.
Mhm.
I'm all for putting the three forms of unity right in there with the three Westminster standards. Get those six together, make a church confess and learn those things, and you'll keep the Armenians out and every other rat
well,
ship.
I agree with
By the
Beaky.
way, I used to, when I'd go onto a ship, the ropes, the
Yeah,
hawser lines, occasionally I'd see a rat going up and a rat coming down. Kid you not.
I was talking with Dr. Underhill about this the other day. I really think that the three forms of unity and the Westminster Standard should be in the back of our Bibles.
Yep, I'm fine with that. Yep.
And I've got an ESV that's like that, and I've got Beaky's King James that's like that. And those are the two Bibles I use the most, besides the one I've got attached to my prayer book.
Okay.
Because I would argue Beaky's, I'm a fan of Sproul's Reformation Study Bible, but Beaky's Reformation Study Bible is every bit as good, and I would argue is better for the laity. I don't know if you have a copy of it yet. It is King James. It's got the Westminster Standards and the three forms of unity in the back, but what Beaky did was he inserted at the end of every chapter of the Bible a section for family worship and how to go through the chapter you just read and explain it to your family on top of the study notes at the bottom of the page. And I think Beaky's study Bible is actually better for the laity if they can handle the King James language
Yeah.
because of the way it's set up. It's designed for pastors to use. And it's what, when I got consecrated bishop, I always laugh. I've been waiting for one of the Anglos to pick up on it. The Bible Peter handed me was Beaky's study Bible with the three forms of unity and the Westminster Standards in the back of it.
Huh. I don't have Beaky's study Bible. I've got so many different Bibles around here.
Well, that's one you don't even have to order because the Independent Baptist bookstore up in King actually keeps a stack of them on the shelves. Strangely enough, the Independent Baptist bookstore in King, now it's an independent Armenian Baptist, free will, whatever, has hands down the best section on Puritans and Banner of Truth and all of that of any store I have ever been in on the shelf.
Where is this at?
It's up in King. If you keep going up 52, it's right above Winston. You
Okay.
just stay on 52 and you run it up there. Now, it is a militant denim skirt wearing independent Baptist bookstore that's actually run by Mennonites, which I actually think is funny too. But they have it's called Gullions. It has a whole section in it. And they've got these big stuffed chairs in that section, which I laugh about too, where they have all of the Banner of Truth books. They've got I got the last two copies, the Body of Divinity I've bought from there. I bought the complete Westminster Standards from there, the copy that's got not only the Confession du Catechism, the one with the Directory of Worship and all that in it. They carry Beaky's. They've got a whole shelf of Beaky's study Bible in there, just on the shelf. They're an interesting group. They also have that's also strangely enough, and I laugh because I know the Mennonite that runs it, and he was laughing at me because there were a couple of independent Baptist pastors in there, and I walk in there with my clerics, so they automatically look like they've been sucking on lemons when they see me walking through the door. And I walked up and I pulled, as soon as I walked in, I saw he had my set of Arminius's complete works.
Oh,
He had it sitting on the shelf in the used section. And I just automatically grabbed it because I knew I wasn't going to find it anywhere else. And I took it up to the counter and they all looked at me like, well, is that Reformed theology? They didn't know who Arminius was.
I'll tell you, Arminius and the Arminians at Dort were not backwoodsmen. They were
No,
extremely educated and extremely crafty and extremely deceitful. And they were highly trained
right.
with the Belgic and Heidelberger and the teachings of the Reformed Church.
Arminius knows Calvin inside and out.
Yeah, and loved Calvin
Right,
and had the approval of Theodore Beza, his studied under Beza.
right.
It was a demonic attack to attack the person and work of Christ and attack the Trinity. Now, the average Arminian has not thought that through, but when you get into the depths and the bowels of the ship, there's junk down in the ship, down at the bottom. They call it the bilge, waters and oil and junk. It's the bilges, which exalts man and belittles God. That's the bottom line.
But Donald, I'm going to tell you the sad part about it is after reading through Arminius, I don't disagree with the words you said. Okay, understand that coming out the gate. Arminius is still more reformed than most people who claim the name right now that are supposedly confessionals. And that to me is not a defense of Arminius. It's a sad state of the affairs of the modern church.
This is why I'm pushing confessional churchmanship so people can learn to confess the truth, to speak the truth, hold, defend, and enjoy the comforts and strength of knowing the truth and not being blown around by every loud talker out there. I'm telling you, I'm enjoying their sinus on the Heidelberger.
Well, people are not, it's the fault of the pulpit. I had to stop. I don't know if I told you this last week. I literally had to stop both my Wednesday night study of Revelation and my Thursday morning study of the Gospel of St. John to teach a class on hermeneutics. And they all looked at me like I had a hole in my head, and I had to explain to them all of you have a hermeneutic, whether you realize the word or not. You have a way you read scripture, and I have discovered the majority of modern Christians have somehow, even in confessional churches, either adopted a progressive hermeneutic or a dispensational hermeneutic, even in confessional churches. And they don't seem to understand the discontinuity. Look at John MacArthur. How can John MacArthur support the 5 points of Calvinism and still hold to dispensational eschatology? How can somebody claim that you have to be a credo Baptist and still hold to the 5 points of Calvinism? It doesn't make sense. We got into it with the whole idea of the age of accountability and how you cannot defend the age of accountability using the Bible. It's not in there.
Yeah.
And it's coming from a place where it's not just people are not taught the Bible, they're not taught how to read the Bible. They're not taught you read in context, that you read through the passage, that you read, you don't proof text, you don't just lift one verse up and turn it into something else. You read it and you read it over and you read it over and you read it over and you read it in the chapter and you read it in the book and you read it in relation to what comes before or after. And then you let the Bible interpret itself. You don't bring, I told them ultimately, if I had a wish for my laity is they would all get rid of their study Bibles. Not because I don't like study Bibles, but because the laity aren't trained to understand the notes at the bottom of the page are not the equivalent of the text of the Bible at the top. And that it is up to you to read the text, the clear and simple meaning of the words, and stop trying to let all these other people tell you what it means. And I think that's another place where Sola Scriptura has been lost. I think most new Christians need to start off with the catechism and a plain reference Bible, and that's it. And that should be where their faith gets grounded from. You learn the creeds, you learn the catechism or the confession, and you just read the plain words on the page, and that's where you move from. They don't need the commentaries, they don't need the notes, they don't need all of that. All that stuff does is serve to distract them from what's in the text.
Well, I'm not an anti-Bible man, so that's why I got books out here.
No,
Um,
I believe we should have books, but that's because we are trained to understand that even Calvin does not supersede the Bible.
right, right. And he would agree
Calvin
with that.
Calvin makes us see his perspective on it and think about what's on the page. I
Oh,
mean,
by the way, as an aside, I was reading Calvin on Romans 4 this morning, which dealt with an earlier question that we dealt with on baptismal regeneration.
mhm,
Now, the head for head crowd reduces regeneration when regeneration, if you study Dort carefully and the Bible carefully, is a mighty change from death
mhm.
to life, condemnation to justification. Tremendous, powerful change, cannot be minimized or belittled. Um, and so when you talk about baptismal regeneration, Calvin was talking about the sacrament of baptism,
Mhm.
that it's potent and that it's a means of grace
Right.
for the elect. Then his very next sentence, he says, but it is, quote, useless and lifeless as a sign to the reprobate.
Correct. And that's what I
And
said.
so,
Man.
so Calvin, and I'm looking forward to 9 through 11. Calvin, I do not believed in baptismal regeneration for every kid coming up front. Jacob and Esau, before they ever did good, were predestined to their ends. Now, it's a hard doctrine. It's a hard doctrine for parents, especially, because we want the best for our kids. But the fact remains, election is governs the efficacy of the word and the sacraments, plural. It's not an empty sign. It's a sign that talks. It's not the reality, just like I-40. It got signs on the road. I know I'm
Mhm.
on the right road. It talks to me, you're on I-40, but the sign is not the asphalt or the white lines or the yellow lines. So likewise, I've got a US flag flying out front. That flag is a sign and a symbol. It's meaningful. It speaks, especially in this Marine community. But that sign and seal and the flag is not the 50 states from Maine to California, from Texas up to Montana and Oregon. No. So the two have to be distinguished. Um, but it's not a bald and empty sign. It's a sign that communicates and speaks the gospel to the elect.
Well,
Anyways,
no. It's important. You're hitting on an important point because Calvin threads the needle. Baptism is not head, baptismal regeneration is not head for head. But at the same time, baptism is not an empty sign.
right.
And the thing is if baptismal regeneration does not work for the elect, baptism by its very nature becomes an empty symbol and a pointless exercise. Something happens at baptism for the elect. Otherwise, we might as well be some sort of Bush Baptist out there that just say, well, I done confessed Jesus and I'm saved, and that's it. No, we are churchmen. We are participators in the means of grace. And I've preached on this the past couple of Sundays as I've gone through the commandments, I've gone through the creed, that God works in the simple means of word and sacrament. We are not to look for big, showy signs. We are not to believe in empty symbols. When the word is rightly preached and the sacraments are rightly administered and church discipline is rightly exercised, God's grace is given.
Let me tell a side story on baptismal regeneration. We pulled into Hania, Crete. It's on the north side of Crete. Pulled in there many times, but I took about 50 sailors and the captain to a monastery, a Greek Orthodox monastery, and the Archbishop of Crete met with us, and it was all set up, and he came in his stovepipe hat and black everything, and we were out in the main, sort of like the quad area. We're all seated in chairs around, and he's up there talking. And I asked the Archbishop what baptism did for children. He said, "Oh, and he spoke good English, by the way. It steamrolls original sin." And it was the answer I was expecting. It's the answer I got. Well, a little old 18 or 19-year-old Texas Baptist boy, he raises his hand to the Archbishop and he goes, "I want to know if you know my Jesus is your Lord and Savior." That confused the Archbishop. He goes, "Well, I was just up this morning and going through some manuscripts we have here at the monastery about the bishops who went from Crete, who went to the Council of Nicaea." So he's answering with the Nicene Creed to this Texas Baptist boy about your Lord and Savior. And after he answered, the Texas boy goes, "Well, if you've accepted Jesus as your Lord and Savior, you're my brother." And I was sitting next to the captain, and I looked at him, and the captain looked at me, and on it went. But this kid was, and by the way, he got out. He went to Southwest Seminary Baptist School, got his MDiv, got his PhD there in family counseling. And he's now bounced off into Eastern Orthodoxy. So quite a trip. He had no confessional heritage. And at that time, I was not teaching the Westminster Confession at that point, not until I started, like I told in your church, 1994 D-Day Bible study. That changed everything. I wish I had started that way back when I began.
But Donald, what you're describing is that threading of the needle Calvin does. We are not going to one extreme or to the other. Baptism does regenerate for the elect. It is not head for head. It is the elect that are regenerated at the moment of baptism.
Or they may be regenerated 20 years later when the truths of the sign, truths of the gospel are made effectual at the 20-year point, but that is not emptying the sign of its significance when administered.
They're tied together either way.
Yeah, I agree.
For the elect, they are tied together. Otherwise, you've got passages like in Peter and all the rest that don't make sense. Because this goes to my thing on hermeneutics. People will sit there and they'll cherry pick verses. And the example I always use, because I had to deal with it in the UCC and I've had to deal with it with the Baptist, is Ephesians chapter 5, verse 1. Wives, submit to your husbands. because I've heard the feminists make hay with it and I've heard the fundamentalists make hay with it. And my argument has always been, you did not read the verse before that says all Christians are to submit to one another. And you did not read the verse after it that says, husbands, be to your wives as Christ was for the church, dying for her. That one verse, wives, submit to your husbands, gets taken so far out of context into an almost abusive situation both ways because nobody reads it in its proper context about mutual Christian submission within proper roles.
Yeah, I'm tired of the feminism argument because I go back, say, to my great great grandparents as farmers,
Mm-hmm.
and 8, 10 kids, and great great grandma takes care of the 8 or 10 kids and gets them off to school while great great grandpa goes out to the barn and does all the farmer stuff. And there was no way they were sitting around saying, "Oh, I'm above you, and I'm above you, and I'm the
Well, they didn't
patriarch."
have time to do that.
They didn't
Grandma
have time to.
Clodfelter was busy doing laundry and working the garden and everything else.
Exactly.
Well,
They were
Grandpa Clodfelter would be on the back 40 doing stuff. Yes, I know what you're talking
there.
about.
They were worked together. They weren't. And
Because
then
if
the
they didn't, they
feminists come.
wouldn't survive.
Yeah, you
And then
know.
when you get into tobacco farms down here, I always laugh about this. North Carolina didn't have slavery out except for out on the coast because we farmed tobacco. And tobacco is a weird crop. It only is really labor intensive about 3 times a year, but when it's labor intensive, you have to have all hands on deck. So it was better to have a big family than a bunch of slaves.
Exactly.
So you'd
And
have everybody and their brother out there 3 times a year. It didn't matter whether you had a vagina, a penis, or whatever, because the tobacco had to be got in. It
yeah,
had to be strung. It had to be put in the barns and the pack house after that. You didn't have time to worry about this, that, or the other.
and that's why they invented summer off from school. So during the harvest season, the boys could go out with dad and do the harvesting while, the mother stayed in there with the girls and made the tomatoes and the marmalades and the foods that they could store for the winter. They were
Oh,
working
Mama
as a
Long used to
team.
always laugh because she had an older sister, my great Aunt Evie. She just died last year at 100. But Mama Long said that Daddy's mama said that she was Grandpa Clodfelter's workhorse because she was the second child. They had 2 girls before they had their first boy. So Mama Long had to go out and work in the fields with the boys the whole time. And she could outwork, outspit, outcuss any of the boys out there.
Back to this protocol you were gonna finish. There was
Well,
something about young guys pushing their own identity and millennial ministers. I didn't quite catch where you're going.
what it comes down to, Donald, is as a study up on this, and these are unwritten rules that I think we all understand instinctively that grew up in the church, even if it's churches we don't agree with, that there's a way pastors interact with one another and there's a way pastors interact with the church. And it's coming down to this new generation of pastors. It's all about me. I grew up understanding that when you became a pastor, you ceased to be you. You became, if I could borrow some language from the Orthodox, the pastor on a level became an icon of Christ to the congregation.
Okay, I get you.
And it's not, I'm not trying to say that in some heretical way. You weren't supposed to exist anymore, so to speak. I mean, you did, but you didn't. You were sort of like the writers of the Bible. Matthew wrote Matthew, but he was speaking God's words.
And never identified himself as the author of Matthew.
I mean, it's why like the black robe. It's why in all honesty, it's why even the Reform maintained the black robe, because when you put the black robe on and go up front, you're not. It doesn't matter whether you're rich, you're poor, whatever you are. Everybody's got the black robe on. The clergy is up there as the academic source that teaches.
Yeah.
It didn't matter whether you had a 50-cent suit or $1,000 suit, it was covered over by that black robe.
Yeah.
It's not about me. It's not about you. It's about Jesus. And what I see, especially with the millennials and going forward, is the clergy that are coming out make it all about them and not about the church.
Do you have, is there something that's prompting this? What, I don't,
There is, but it's in another jurisdiction, and I have not spoke with the leadership in that jurisdiction yet, so I don't necessarily want to.
catch.
I have respect for the leadership, whether I agree with them or not, and I am going to speak to them later. And I am afraid that this individual is going to get his butt chewed out, because once his higher ups, well, I was talking the other day. I was taught for the first 5 years of my ministry, it was my job to sit down, shut up, and listen to what the older preachers had to say. Nobody cared about what my opinion was until I had my time and my skin in the game.
Well,
But I'm
Dr. Roger Nicole and my father as well. And I'd even say RC and Jim Boyce. RC said that a minister is young when he's 40.
right.
It's very young. He's not experienced. And my dad repeated his professor, Roger Nicole's statement that a man shouldn't start writing theology until he's 60. When he's in his 50s, he's still ripening and maturing. And unfortunately, we didn't get much from Dr. Roger Nicole's pen, articles, and journals, but um, there's some truth in that. Uh, I haven't changed my basic theology, the Westminster Standards. I've certainly deepened as I've read more widely. I think I've always been cautious, but I think I'm even more cautious today, unless, of course, I got a backstabber, and a couple of those, to whom I refer,
Mhm.
um, where I just can't tolerate that deceit and backstabbing, so I just smack them down, throw them out. I have no time for it. I guess I'm bolder in that way as an older guy. Um, but I expect mutual respect, even if you disagree with me. Uh,
Donald, I got a call coming in. I got to get
okay.
off.
Okay, understood. Go do your pastor stuff. I'll talk to you later.
All right. Bye, Donald.
Bye.